Woo! The Golden Stallion is here for you, baby. And I told you that this was going to be coming this week. And, I wasn't sure. So what we've got here, we're going to do another part of the series of the Sovryn Top 8 of comic books. I had said with the first one that I did about a couple weeks ago that this would be a series where we're going to have to break it up. We can't just do like the top 8 of all comicdom. There's too much. You couldn't possibly do that right. I mean, not to where you'd get anything of any actual value out of it, because a lot in the top 8 would probably be the things that you'd expect, Batman and, things like this. Not that they don't deserve to be there. It's just that you can't get into the nitty gritty of things if you just do a top 8 of all of comic books. So I said, well, we'll make this into a series. We'll do different ones. We'll do sequels of it, which I've done that before when I did one about heavy metal. And I did like 3 of them. So it was an entire series of top 8s. That was, of course, years ago, back, before there was a Patreon, but these are now Patreon only. And I had mentioned, I believe yesterday, of course, this is getting recorded on January 13th, 2017. Woo, Friday the 13th, baby. Always my luckiest day. And I mean that. Friday the 13th, that is a long ass fucking story. And I'm not talking about Jason Voorhees either. But I had mentioned yesterday on the Q&A, I said, I think I'm going to have to do a sequel, part of the series, but we're going to have to do another part just on Marvel and DC alone, because that's what we started off with, was Marvel Comics and DC Comics. Now, if you haven't heard that one yet, I do recommend you listen to that, because I give a lot of background on Marvel and DC, and really how I got into comic books and all the rest of it. So now, the easy thing to do is that if you're on Patreon, of course, if you have the feed, the Patreon RSS feed on your, favorite podcast app. It's easy enough, to find it, comic books or, top 8 comic books, right? But if you want to go to the website, you can actually go to sovryntech.com or patreon.com/sovryntech. You can go there, and there's an option where you can look at things via tags, like how they're tagged, and you can just find top 8, and then all the top 8s will show up for you. At least all the ones that I've done on Patreon, since I started releasing Patreon exclusive episodes, which has only been a few months now. So if you want to hear that, I do recommend you listen to that one first, because that'll give you a lot of understanding as to what we're talking about here in this one. But again, I got a lot of questions from the first one that I did. Some of them are Marvel and DC related, others are not. So I'm just going to stick with a couple. I am going to get to a couple questions as well as another top 8 here for Marvel and DC. But I'm just going to stick with the questions that are relevant to Marvel and DC, as far as that goes. So the top 8, I guess I'm deciding which direction do I want to go with this. Maybe I'll just start off with the top 8 that we're going to do. So this is an extended top 8, which I wish I kind of knew I was going to do this, because I had mentioned, none of which will be in this top 8, but in the previous comic book top 8 that I did for Marvel and DC, I had mentioned a lot of, other storylines and characters and all that I just think are awesome. And so if I knew I was going to do a whole other top 8, I probably would have saved a lot of them for it. I mean, hell, as far as Marvel and DC alone, I could probably do 20 top 8s. But I don't want to do that. I want to keep that kind of limited, and I want to get into the more, not necessarily obscure, but less well-known comic book universes and companies in the upcoming episodes of this. So, and I had said when I did the first one, I said, I don't know when I'm going to be able to get a lot of these out necessarily. So, but this is one that I feel, very confident enough, to get out there to where I can lay out, a lot of really great information, because a lot of these storylines are near and dear to me. As to where otherwise, I want to talk a little bit about the companies and where they come from. And some of them I want to just, do a little more personal research, on the companies, because I think that'd be interesting, kind of to talk about. So with all of that said, why don't we break into our Marvel and DC, our second top 8 of, the entire goddamn thing. And we'll start off. One of the critiques that I received, I guess you could say, of my coverage of, top 8 comic books. Now, I mean, and they're simple critiques. I mean, it's my opinion, my choice on what's going to appear in the top 8. And of course, if you haven't listened to any of these before and you still haven't gone back and listened to the previous top 8 of comic books, then I'll just say again, the number 8 is totally arbitrary, just like the number 5 and 10 and 3 that people use for top 3, top 5. Those are completely fucking arbitrary. And so I just chose a totally arbitrary one that I haven't seen anybody else use. So I'm giving you the top 8s here. And it also fits in with my fetish for base 12 math. So, one of the critiques I got was people were shocked at how little I talked about mutants in, as far as Marvel goes, in the last comic book top 8. And, well, I'll tell you, like, I get it. I understand, the whole mutant phenomenon and the blah, 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 blah. And I think, there's a lot of the characters that are really, really cool. Obviously, Wolverine is really cool. There's a reason he's so popular. But, I'll admit, like, that wasn't... So first off, I'm a DC boy. Like, my heart and soul is in DC, first and foremost, or at least that's how it used to be. I talked quite a bit about all of the continual rebooting that they have been doing over the past few years. And literally just in the past 5 years, they've rebooted practically 4 or 5 times. It's terrible. But growing up, my heart and soul was in DC, so that's part one. And then, when I got into Marvel, in a lot of ways with Marvel, I really went after the corollaries of my favorite characters in DC comics. For example, like, Batman was my favorite DC character. So who did I like in Marvel? I liked Iron Man, because Iron Man is, at the end of the day, Marvel's Batman, and still to this day, really just a copy in a lot of ways. So the mutants, the whole X-Men thing, I think in a lot of ways, that's really what has allowed, or definitely what got Marvel through the 90s, and what got Marvel, maybe even through the 80s, what got Marvel through a lot of tough times. Now Marvel's characters, Captain America and Iron Man and all of them, they really kind of stand on their own feet, no problem. And there's actually no real call for there to be like an Avengers book anymore. They used to be necessary because you had to make all of these disparate characters kind of exciting. And that's why you had, these big team-ups. And, the whole mutant phenomenon, X-Men, if you didn't know what I was talking about, like, that really was something that was Marvel. In my opinion, that was Marvel's bread and butter. That is what kept that company afloat for so long until Disney bought them out. And it's because it was so unique. It was something that no other company really had. And honestly, like, DC has nothing like X-Men. And, that's a good thing, in my opinion. But for me as a fan, it wasn't a good thing. Like, for me, it was like, okay, I don't need this. And so it wasn't until much later on, in fact, probably it wasn't until the X-Men cartoon came out in the 90s, the exceptionally well done and very popular cartoon. Arguably, I think if somebody ever did a top list of cartoons, I'll do a top 8 animated series at some point. And I'm not saying this would rank for me personally, but among the populace, I think it's fair to say that Batman the Animated Series, and there have been a lot of different sites and venues have done, lists like this where they do the top cartoons of all time. Batman the Animated Series is generally considered the greatest cartoon ever made. And I think that, I wouldn't argue much with anybody who said that, because it is that damn fucking good. It inspired, even though it itself was inspired very much by, Tim Burton's Batman movies, it itself inspired and changed the entire comic book landscape for DC in so many ways, as did the Tim Burton movies. But Batman the Animated Series, like, just kind of, put the nail on the coffin of what Batman should be like, and what elements you need to get rid of him for that. We might talk about that more in this top 8. So, but then number 2, I think, behind Batman the Animated Series, I think what most people would say is the greatest, cartoon of all time would probably be the 92 X-Men. And it is that fucking good. It was a fucking awesome. Now, that's not my first bit of top 8 here, but I'm building up to this. The 92 X-Men, which actually, there's a comic out right now, which is really good, which could make my top 8 if it wanted to. What is the X-Men 92 comic, which totally harkens back to sort of that stylizing of the cartoon from the 90s of the X-Men. But that was ridiculously popular. And when I saw that, I thought that was so cool that put everything right over the top for me. And frankly, I think that X-Men cartoon is what made the movie X-Men, that Hugh Jackman finally came in with. That's what made that, help that become a reality, and what really helped that do numbers, because you had a bunch of kids grow up from 92 all the way till what? When did that come out? 97, 98, the first X-Men movie. But they grew up and said, oh, shit, here's the live action thing. I want a piece of that. I want to go see that. And, of course, there's great actors involved, no doubt about that. Definitely Patrick Stewart and Hugh Jackman saved that movie, and quick comment on that, too. And I've talked about this before on Sovryn Tech, I know, but I remember in high school when the first X-Men, when they said we're making an X-Men movie, the biggest conversation going around was, how the fuck do you bring Wolverine to life? How do you make that happen? He is such a badass. He is so, he's so relatable because, he kind of appeals to that animal side of humanity, perhaps. He's so relatable, but he doesn't, but he looks kind of outrageous in the comic books. He has the wild hair and all this stuff. And God damn it, Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackman should get a Lifetime Achievement Award alone for making Wolverine look totally realistic and legit. You have your suspension of disbelief is suspended completely successfully. You totally believe that guy is Wolverine. He brought that comic book character to life. That is no small feat. Make no mistake about that. So anyway, that's just a side note. So the X-Men, the 90s cartoon of X-Men is what really, really, finally for me said, okay, no, mutants are cool. And so then I started reading things, as far as X-Men goes. And I found, this awesome world that before I really probably wouldn't have bothered much. And it's a credit, too, because a lot of the great comic books, they turn those storylines and they, Dark Phoenix and all of this, they jammed all that into even Age of Apocalypse. They jammed it all into that 92 comics, that X-Men cartoon from the 90s. You couldn't help but get appealed and, get attracted to wanting to read these books. And certainly Marvel was with the X-Men comics in the 90s, they were, and even the late 80s really, they took a lot of their adult, kind of their adult content, or more adult content, a lot of their sexier content, and they just, they experimented heavy with the X-Men line because it was really popular, it was selling, so they could try different things, and they took everything to the next level as far as that goes. And understand that X-Men, or, the whole mutant thing, there was kind of a theory that at some point they would be sort of their own universe. They wouldn't be, there was talks of this going around. And in fact, that's kind of, if you listen to the first top 8 that we did for comic books here on Sovryn Tech, there was the Heroes Reborn storyline that came out in 96, 97. That was probably going to be when mutants and, in superheroes of Marvel, when Marvel was going to kind of split into 2 universes. That's exactly what happened there. But you got to listen to that first top 8 to learn more about Heroes Reborn, and you can learn about that. So I liked X-Men a lot. I started to really enjoy the whole mutant story. And yeah, I get it. There's kind of the trope of, well, these characters represent the outsiders in all of us and all that. And so, a lot of kids in school that would get picked on really appreciated the X-Men and having that special school for them to go to, blah, 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 blah. And I get all that. It got to the point really with X-Men titles to where it was very tough. And I talked about this in the previous top 8. It was some of these storylines and some of this other shit, it became very tough to try and learn to follow the entire story. You couldn't follow everything going on in the mutant universe or in the mutant side of the Marvel universe. And that sucked. That became really problematic. And in fact, Marvel knew it, and that's why I think around 2001 or so, when Grant Morrison took over and they did the new X-Men storyline, which was great, by the way, they started boiling it back down to okay, we got to calm this shit down because nobody can follow this stuff, and you're losing readers when events are happening in whole other comic books that people just can't afford to buy, and people get pissed off and they want to walk away. They want to have the complete story. And again, largely in many ways, you're trying to appeal to kids, or at least that's the theory, because those kids will then, 20, 30 years down the line, they need to keep buying the comic books regardless. I'm not saying I'm okay with that. I'm just saying, understand, or that's how I like things. I'm just saying that's kind of how it is. So for a while, I kind of stepped away. I read New X-Men when Grant Morrison took over. I thought that was really cool, and they had kind of that U-Men storyline where, this guy was trying to make everybody into a mutant and everything, going for the ultimate inequality. Woo! And, it was good after a little while, and then I don't know, I kind of dropped off. And, of course, I went into the military and, couldn't exactly read comic books there very well, some. But, so I ended up, I kind of just, like, left the whole X-Men thing behind. It's like, all right, I'm forget it, I'm done for now. And I'll just, I'll stick to my Batman and, some of the other big stories for a while and all this. But then I caught a cover of, and I still kept an eye. At this point, we're talking after 2003, and particularly really after 2006, when suddenly, now there's entire websites where you can keep up with all the storylines and what's going on. And so you can read about things, as to where, in the 90s, that wasn't really possible. So, then I'm at the comic book store and I see this just fucking amazing cover, for an X-Men title. And this is where we're going to start our top 8. And again, no particular order on this. It's just going to be 8 things. It's not like, this is number 1 or something. Though this could easily take number 1 in a lot of slots for me, especially as far as Marvel stories and team-ups and characters go. This was just, this is an all-star cast. This was amazing. So what I saw, it was for Uncanny X-Force. Now, of course, X-Force was a title made famous really in the 90s because of Cable, the character of Cable, who is, of course, the son of Cyclops, from the future, blah, blah, blah. Anyway. X-Force was cool, especially, because, like, Magneto's daughter was in it. X-Force is this really extreme title. As much as X-Men was, extreme in the 90s, X-Force was really fucking extreme. Like, they were doing wild, wild storylines in all this. And so I always kind of enjoyed the X-Force title. There's times where, with any X-Men title, things have, it's a bit of a roller coaster. There's times where the title is trying to be one of those more realistic ones, or trying to be one where, there's a lot more, like, interpersonal drama and all this. Not that I have any problem with that. But I really, like, there's a certain expectation, especially when your appreciation for the X-Men comes from something like, say, the 92 comic or cartoon. You want things to be kind of, over the top, really sexy artistry, really kind of sexy storylines, and just, kind of this real outsider, sort of tone, I guess, to the whole thing. And so I saw this cover for Uncanny X-Force, and this would have been like 2011, I guess, something like that. And 2010, 2011, somewhere around there. And the cover, it was instantaneous. You had Psylocke on the cover, which you have to understand how important Psylocke is. Psylocke is the representation of everything that every teenage boy loved about Marvel in the 90s, okay? She is, I think, unquestionably, like, just, speaking conventionally, not necessarily down to personal taste, but just kind of conventionally or whatever. She is the sexiest comic book character perhaps ever created. You might want to say something like Michael Turner's Fathom to me or something like that. I get it, but let's be clear here that, like, she is the personification of just exotic, erotic, comic book characterization. She really is. Do I think, like, she's the hottest or my favorite or something like that? No, I would pick Wonder Woman or even Power Girl maybe over that. But I get it, all right? She has, like, kind of this, sort of quasi-Asian look to her. Like she is, and the outfit she's wearing, and she's a ninja, of course, was very appealing to me. And she had, the Psy blades or whatever, where she had, like, these psionic blades that could, And there were comic books where, she definitely used off her sex appeal quite a bit. So anyway, that was really something. But you had Psylocke on the cover. You had Wolverine was there, Archangel, and Deadpool. I mean, just those names alone are big enough. And then you had the new character, or somewhat new character. He was introduced more towards, within New X-Men, Phantom X, who is one of my favorite mutants now. I mean, he is so cool and so powerful. I mean, the guy, literally bends reality effectively. Then, of course, Phantom X has kind of his sort of external nervous system, EVA, which was part of it too. Now that, I mean, like just seeing that, and of course, the Apocalypse Solution. That's kind of that was the name of the first volume, first 6 issues of this whole lineup. But I saw that and I was like, wow! And they all had like this uniform look, as in they were all wearing sort of these like black, gray, and white sort of uniforms, and it looked really cool. I mean, just the cover alone looked phenomenal. And again, that's what you do with this. The point of the cover. It's what you do with it. And it totally caught my eye. I picked it up. I was like, all right, just that team alone looks fucking awesome. I want to know what's going on with this. And I picked it up, and it was a badass title. And all of it, and so Uncanny X-Force, which is, that was a new name for a title. It wasn't like a reboot of an older title other than it bringing in X-Force. But what it ended up being is kind of a Black Ops X-Men team. Now, that appeals to me right out of the gate. I think that's so badass and so cool. And it all took, this is all following the events of M-Day, where a lot of mutants lost their powers, blah, blah, blah. It was, or not lost their powers, but, there weren't any more, yeah. Anyway, Trouble in Mutant City. And it was just like, it was such a cool book, and it was sexy again. It was making X-Men sexy again. And you had, Psylocke and Phantom X, rocking it out. I mean, you had so much going on. Everything was really, undercover, doing all the things that, nobody else, no other X-Men team could do. Everything was really secretive. It was really cool. It was like reading an X-Men spy story. And it delivered. And it only went for, that team, like I said, they kind of changed some of it up, but largely that was the team. Like, they would bring in Deathlock later on, Archangel would leave, but still it would be that Psylocke, Wolverine, Phantom X, Deadpool, and Deadpool was great because Deadpool was being a badass again instead of just being a goddamn comedian, which I get it, but, there was a time where he wasn't a comedian, So anyway, I thought it was such a great title, so sexy, and they let the sex appeal, not just from Psylocke, but from everybody. They let it drip. Frankly, just being straight up with you, and this is no shock coming from the Golden Stallion, but there's a million times where I figured, baby, there must have been they had to be having 4-ways at some point there. When you've got Psylocke, you got Phantom X, you got Wolverine, you got Deadpool. Come on. People are rocking shit. You know what I mean? Like there's every single issue with that. And it's popular. If you go looking on, on torrent sites, you'll find, because Uncanny X-Force kind of kept on going. In fact, they just relaunched it 2 years ago during their whole Marvel Now reboot, and it sucked. Don't read that. It doesn't even compare. The one, I think they call it effectively Volume 2. Do not bother with that one. But, oh shit, what was I going to say? Well, anyway, yeah, just super sexy books. And oh, yeah, that's what I was saying on torrent sites. On torrent sites, you'll easily find Volume 1. And, it'll come up, Uncanny X-Force, and they will give you just that time frame because everybody knew just how badass it was. And even the interpersonal stuff was there. The characterization was top-notch. The writing, everything was fucking perfect. So, in the art, Jerome Opeña was doing great art, Rick Remender, they were all they were knocking it out. It was such a great title. Not a surprise that it went 35 issues. I am shocked that it could, really, if they kept it the original team, the original creative team overall, I think they could have kept going forever. And it could have been, I don't think they wanted it to, probably because what really happened, I think, was that come around 2011, Disney, not Marvel, Disney was realizing we have a cash cow here with these Marvel movies, and it's going to trickle down to the comic books. We need to dump these fucking adult titles, these more adultish titles. And granted, Disney doesn't, make the X-Men movies, but also the X-Men movies were doing fairly well, in 2011. And so I think, sadly, I think again, this is something I talked about in episode 207 of Sovryn Tech, where I said, look, and I've talked about it before over the years, but sadly, everything that you love, or not everything that you love, everything in the world pretty much is made for the average person. And so, if you're a person that can really appreciate, just the raw sex dripping from a title like Uncanny X-Force, guess what? You're going to get sooner or later. They're going to say, "Screw you. We don't care. We need to. We got to have more readers. Even though they don't realize if they just embrace kind of that attitude that they were pushing, that's what made them get through the '90s, and that's what gives them their longevity is because they're appealing to adults. More so because the adults at the end of the day are really the ones with money. Even though you could say, well, the adults spend all their money on kids, though. Well, that's kind of changing, especially if you look more on a global scale. But regardless, Uncanny X-Force, the 2010 to 2010 to 2011 run, pretty much when you had that more or less that core team of not so much even Archangel, but just Deadpool, Phantom X, Psylocke, and Wolverine. Those are kind of the big four. Other than that, there'd be some changes here and there. As long as you had them, it was one of the best titles ever done. I loved it. Easily my favorite X-Men title ever made. With that run. And there's been some fairly interesting ones. I kind of dug, a couple years ago when they had that all-female X-Men title, which was ironic because it was called X-Men, but it worked. I thought it was good. With Storm kind of leading the charge. I liked it a lot. So anyway, that's the first on this list is Uncanny X-Force, especially that first volume and particularly the first half of that volume from 2010 to 2011 when 2012 came around, they started getting issue like 30 or something. I think it kind of started, falling apart a little bit. But that original run, Jesus Christ, or Great Satan, was that so good? So, all right, let's move on to another one. And we can stick within Marvel here for a second. So the next one on the list then is someone that I half-jokingly say is my favorite comic book character. Half-jokingly. Obviously, Batman tops my list. I talked about in the last top 8 in many ways. But this this is something else. This is such a product of, we were just talking about kind of the sensuality that the X-Men delivered in the 90s. Well, Marvel was, when they realized it was working with the X-Men, they started putting it in a lot of their other titles and, kind of subgenres of Marvel Comics. And yes, there was a story, and this was a story arc that went between like 3 different titles. That being Silver Sable, who is the kind of the famous all silver. She's mercenary, did a lot of stuff with Spider-Man, blah blah blah. Definitely sex appeal there, obviously. But Silver Sable. Luke Cage, who's now all the rage. Everybody loves Luke Cage now, apparently, even though in the 90s, and really even before in many ways, was the second big character. And it's always, I love, and I say that with sarcasm, I love the world that we're in now, where suddenly everybody's like, oh yeah, I love, Luke Cage, or I love Daredevil, or, Power Fist, Iron Fist, Iron Fist, Power Man and Iron Fist. I love Iron Fist. I love all these. And it's like, nobody loved these fucking characters. Are you kidding me? Maybe in the 70s people liked them, but, in the 80s and 90s and the aughts, nobody gave 2 goddamn shits. It's so ironic how people are like, oh yeah, I've been such a big Luke Cage fan forever. And believe me, I think Luke Cage is actually like a pretty cool character in a lot of ways. Particularly, he's actually in the 90s, I thought he was kind of cool. Just nobody took him that seriously, as hard as they tried to, kind of bring him back in with his own title. I really appreciate what he brings to the table, and I'm dead serious about that. But I get so many comic book fans today. I can't stand them. They're so full of shit. But anyway, not all, just a lot of them. So this is a character. This is a villain, actually, and definitely. I guess I'll say this. I like Dr. Doom a lot, but I'll say that this guy's probably my favorite villain, even though he's only appeared once. In one story arc, in all of Marvel's history, he kind of needs to come back. But somehow he keeps ending up in all the, because Marvel's, what do they have, the A to Z guidebooks? or the handbooks for the Marvel Universe. He appears in every single edition that comes out, but he was only in one series. It's remarkable that he gets that kind of rate. But anyway, the character is Priapus. Now, the name Priapus might be familiar to you, whether you're a comic book fan or not, because Priapus is the name of a rustic Greek god, and a kind of a famous Greek god. Now, the rustic Greek gods, when they say rustic, it means that they were more for people kind of outside of the empire at large, and he was a god of fertility, Priapus, and he has kind of a funny story behind him. I won't go into the funny story, but I will tell you why he looks so funny. You can instantly recognize anytime you see the Greek god Priapus in art, and that is because he has a gigantic, and I mean gigantic, erection. It is huge, and in fact, the name Priapus actually has to do with a medical condition relative to that sort of thing. So anyway, you instantly recognize whenever you see Priapus, in ancient art. Now, the Marvel character of Priapus doesn't fall too far from the extended tree, shall we say. Not that you ever see him with a gigantic cock or anything, but this is a character based heavily around sensuality. Priapus is, he kind of has like this like almost like a beast man kind of look, and he's this, when he gets introduced, he's sort of this cult leader, and pretty much Silver Sable's trying to hunt him down. Luke Cage is going along with her. It's this one singular storyline. In fact, there's recently, because of the resurgence in the popularity of Luke Cage, there was a volume 2 of like the greatest Luke Cage stories, and this entire story arc is in it, even though it takes place over Luke Cage, Silver Sable, and also another character, Terror, the Terror, who had a comic series called Terror Inc. at the time in Marvel proper. The Terror is this very funny looking character, kind of like has like these, looks like a monster, sort of has these whiskers, like a monster private detective. And he's a character originally from Epic Illustrated, which was a subsidiary of Marvel Comics. It was, like a side print, kind of like what Image does or what Image used to do with a lot of its other prints. Now Image is just like a tent. It's not really a company itself. But anyway, back in the 80s, you had Epic Illustrated, which was, and we might talk about this a little bit later, Epic Illustrated became like this science fiction arm of Marvel. But it wasn't really part of Marvel, even though in the 90s, Marvel would try to, after Epic was shut down, it was a creator-owned subsidiary of Marvel. After Epic Illustrated got shut down, they tried to take what they saw as perhaps some of the best aspects of the Epic Illustrated kind of universe and put it into the Marvel Universe proper, the Terror being one of them. And the Terror, his power was pretty much like if he ate a limb off of somebody, he could get their abilities. There you have it. Okay, not a very interesting character to me whatsoever, but he just so happened to be a part of one of my favorite story arcs in Marvel history, or in comic book history, really. And so in this story arc, you have Priapus, who's the head of this cult that is like this entire, kind of supervillain cult that's based around, sensuality, around sensual pleasures and all this. And he is searching. Priapus is, kind of acting like a sort of not an art dealer, but kind of an antiquities collector of sort. And he's looking for what's known as this carnal serpent, which is supposedly like this artifact that was actually apparently the serpent that tempted Eve. But it's this serpent that has this, extreme erotic power. Dead serious. I know this sounds like it sounds like the script for or the story for some porn or some softcore porn or something. But no, this is dead serious. This is was part of Marvel's history for a long time. Because this initial story started back in this would have been 96, 95, 96, something like that, maybe a little earlier. And so he hires Priapus, the quote unquote heroes, Silver Sable, Cage, Luke Cage and the Terror, not knowing that he's the villain. He hires Silver Sable to try and find the carnal serpent. And, it's like in 3 pieces. And then effectively, they do end up finding it. But the amazing thing here, okay, in this, it's I think it was 6 issues, maybe. How does Priapus defeat when he finally gets all the pieces and everything, and sort of the characters realize what's going on, I mean, like there's a point sort of where he kind of takes over their minds a bit. That's very interesting. But like the way that his superpower that he effectively defeats them with, and it's right in the fucking comic pages, he gives them orgasms. Like literally, Luke Cage is just coming. Like, I mean, you don't get to you don't see the physical ejaculation, of course, but you get the gist. The word bubble is laying out the moans, and Silver Sable is just moaning, and and like they can barely get up, and I mean, it's nuts. It's this crazy, like how that storyline ever became a fucking thing. I have no idea. I am so glad it is. I think it's fucking hot as hell. And I really understand, why Priapus has never come back, but Marvel never seems to shine. I mean, when did they do their last handbook? Well, the official handbook was 2006, something like that. I think they did their last one in 2013 or something. He was still in there. So I love it, I mean, and then it ends up, I mean, spoiler alerts, the story's only been around for 30 years or 20 years. But spoiler alerts, like eventually they find the Carnal Serpent and they defeat Priapus. Well, I mean, that's probably part of the reason why, it seems that Priapus is dead. Like it looks like the Carnal Serpent kind of destroys it. But the Carnal Serpent is, oh yeah, no, I'm this thing. I'm out there. Hey, rock and roll, and everybody kind of moves on. But like, damn, I mean, to have something that is just so overt about this is sex, baby. I mean, like that was, for me, that was unheard of, and I think for a lot of people, in fact, I've never read, as far as out of the big boys, out of like Marvel, DC, maybe Dark Horse or like Valiant or something like that, never seen anything else like it, ever. I mean, well, there was that one Justice League Europe issue where they went in that cave, and well, anyway, woo. but hot damn, I'm in awe of that is a reality, that was a canon part of the Marvel universe for so long. Just mind-boggling to me. I mean, and hey, I mean, Silver Sable have an orc. Hey, okay. So Priapus is the second bit on our list here. All right, let's shake it up. Let's go to something else. Let's switch it over to DC. How about that? And this is something it really should have been in my top 8, in my last top 8, because I am so happy about this. In fact, in a lot of ways, it's really sort of the major thing that I'm actually even reading from DC that the company DC is making. It's not, as far as I understand it, it's not actually part of the DC universe, but it is definitely in the DC imprint. And this is, I'm kind of cheating here because I'm not cheating. So DC did some kind of deal with Hanna-Barbera, with the Hanna-Barbera franchises, I guess you could say. And now Hanna-Barbera, of course, I mean, everybody, if you're at least over 30, I imagine everybody remembers Hanna-Barbera. I mean, we're talking about, Scooby-Doo, Space Ghost, Johnny Quest. You could keep going down the list of all these, classic, especially from the 60s, though in the 80s there was kind of a reboot as well as in the 90s, where, just these classic Saturday morning cartoon characters. I mean, they owned it, man. Hanna-Barbera was the shit. And honestly, for number 3 on our list here, they are the shit again. I mean, they are rocking it. So DC in 2016 started this entire new, I mean, it's still DC, but they started this comic line of, now one of them isn't exactly Hanna-Barbera, but it's strange. Okay, we'll put it that way. But you have, well, the main one that I want to mention to you is my favorite of the bunch, and that is Future Quest. So this is a joint kind of operation between Hanna-Barbera and DC. And it has, Future Quest is sort of an anthology series, but definitely everything is coming together like to where all of these characters are going to start interacting. But it's an anthology series of Johnny Quest, of Space Ghost, of my personal favorite, or one of my personal favorite cartoons of all time, the Herculoids. I did a whole episode. not a whole episode. I named an episode of Sovryn years ago. I Want to Live Like the Herculoids. You can find it. And at the end of it, during the climax, I talked about what I love about the Herculoids. I mean, it is just a fantasy come true. It is so cool. Come to cellular, or to animation. But this is all being done in a very adult fashion. This is not necessarily for kids. Like the Hanna-Barbera DC kind of conglomerate here is really pushing, like, this is serious, this is heavy duty. And in fact, issue number 2 of Future Quest answers a kind of an age-old question, a decades-old question of what exactly happened with the Herculoids? Like, how does Xandor, kind of the main guy character from that. Like Xandor seems to, Xandor and his wife and their son, they all seem to be able to, like, they understand technology, and like these villains keep appearing on their planet, where, they're living kind of a more primitive lifestyle. They keep landing there, and they all seem to know Xandor. Like Xandor used to be some, the best theory you'd have is that somehow Xandor was some kind of, maybe like in the military or something, or he was just some galactic badass who finally said, "I've had enough of this shit. I'm going to have my woman and my son, and we're off. We're going to go find some primitive planet, and we're just going to live it up, and not deal with it." And of course, they make Gloop and Gleep and all the rest of them, and all the Herculoids. And you finally get an answer in, I think it was just issue number 2, where you get an answer as to what exactly happened, like how exactly did, what's going on, with Xandor, why did he end up leaving, what's Tara's story? Of course, that's kind of his wife. What's with Domo? Or Dorno? It was really cool, and I'll tell you. Spoiler alert here, folks. What you find out is that, like, the world that Xandor and all of them were from, like, the machines effectively took over, and so that's why they went to to another planet, to effectively get away from that and not be a part of it. And so, but Future Quest has kind of this machine empire going after them again, and so it's just a great anthology series, great storyline going on. I love it. And DC's done well with Hanna-Barbera properties in the past. There was the 2005 Space Ghost series. It was a limited run that was fantastic, and it wasn't a comedy. It was dead serious Space Ghost, like Space Ghost originally was. Look, I love Space Ghost Coast to Coast. Don't mistake me. I think that was great work in the 90s, one of my must-watch things. It's mailbag day. I get it, okay? Zorak was the man. But there was a time where Space Ghost was serious as a heart attack, and you get that again in the Future Quest comic book. Now, they're also doing, they have a couple other titles kind of under this Hanna-Barbera, joint operation. They have Scooby-Doo Apocalypse, which I've talked about on Sex and Science Hour a few times. It is such a good comic run, because it does that same thing where it takes Scooby-Doo, sexies it up, puts it on steroids, tremendous action, takes place in the future, and it's a lot of fun. So they're doing great with that as well under the Hanna-Barbera titles. Then they have, and this is kind of the one that this is the wild card here, the Flintstones. Now, don't think that this is, it's not that crap. This is like a sexy Flintstones, and they're drawn, they're not so much like these kind of odd anthropomorphized, but, characters, or like caricatures. They're drawn as they should be. And, Wilma's hot. The whole thing, it's really, really cool. It's a serious Flintstones. And it's not like based off of the John Goodman movies or anything from the 90s either. this is serious. And it's really good. They're like 8 issues in. It's fantastic. I don't know if you're like I guess what would be a Flintstones purist or something, you're probably going to hate it, but it's fantastic. I love it. The other one that they're doing, the 4th title they're doing under this, is called Wacky Raceland, which I don't know if that's based off of like Wacky Wheels or what exactly the idea is, but that's another one. That's not as exciting. Future Quest is definitely the big winner here. Scooby-Doo Apocalypse is also really good, and the Flintstones is really good. So the whole DC Hanna-Barbera thing that they have going on right now is just one of the best things to come out of 2016. It's awesome. It is so good, and very few issues in. So you can jump on board with it, and really get it. The only thing is that with Future Quest, they're not really introducing the characters at all. Not that there's a whole ton of characterization to even glean if you watched all of the cartoons that Hanna-Barbera made for all time, okay? But you kind of have an idea of what it's all about. There is an abstract notion of like what the Herculoids are. There is an abstract notion of, Johnny Quest and a lot of this other stuff. So if you don't have that, I don't know how well it's necessarily going to appeal to you. That's a good question to raise, but I just think it's so good. I'm so happy that they're doing that lineup. So anyway, DC, Hanna-Barbera there, particularly Future Quest. That's number 3 on our list here. Let's go to all right. Let's go to number 4. This is this is going to be a unique pick on my part because it's relative to. This is a single panel. Now, a panel in comic books, if you don't already know, is just a comic book page is usually it's either a double page spread or it's a single page spread, or on one page it is broken up into multiple little drawing segments, and those segments are called panels. Okay, and this is one panel, single page. It's not a double page spread. Okay, it's just or what they call a centerfold because it folds in the center. Get it? This is just a single page spread, and it was just when this came out, I literally put this. I bought another issue of the comic. And I put it, it was the last page of the comic, and it was an issue of Wonder Woman. It was during the Last Laugh, Joker Last Laugh, which that was like 2001. That entire story arc, which was, it had its ups and downs. We'll put it that way. I won't break down into that. But there's this one panel at the very end of it where like Superman's kind of going nuts and because of the whole Joker stuff. And you have to understand the Last Laugh storyline. I don't want to break into it entirely, but pretty much the Joker is like taking over various people, with his laughing gas and everything. And so some heroes get affected, some don't. Some villains get affected, some don't. And he's just trying to kind of, it's a strange story arc. Like there's a point where, the Joker sends out his minions to kidnap, Harley Quinn because he needs to impregnate her so he can have an heir. Because the idea is that he's supposedly dying. It's a crazy story. But this one panel out of Wonder Woman during that storyline, and I'll attach it to this episode. So you're going to have to go to the Patreon page. It won't show up in the show notes, but I'll put an attachment where you can see this panel. And it's beautiful artistry. It's very well done. It's just after not a Superman reboot, but Superman kind of coming back. Largely after his whole Electric Superman, or the Superman Blue phase, which was in my top 8 in the last episode, in the last top 8 that we did for comic books. And you can tell because the S symbol on him it's not red with the yellow, in between. It's red with the black in between, which I like that. And it's just after like this really catastrophic event that happened in DC where literally entire planets had been destroyed. And you kind of get why Superman, sort of faltered during this whole Last Laugh storyline. And you don't understand, you get it once you see this panel. Because you find out that he's effectively in a very emotionally weakened state. And it's so I went into tears. I had goosebumps when I read just this one last panel. Because who finally stops Superman from this, Joker rampage is Wonder Woman. And she beats him by wrapping him in the lasso of truth. And so he has to tell the truth. He has to, his real self has to come out. And it does. And this is just so huge. The panel is Wonder Woman. There's, the city's just wrecked from what Superman was doing. Wonder Woman is holding Superman. Superman's on his knees. She's down on her knees. And honestly, it's sexy too, in my opinion. Wonder Woman's holding Superman to her chest. Superman is crying. And I'll read you the quote. I have the JPEG here. I'll read you the quote. In Superman saying, all those worlds, all those people, so many died. Diana, of course that's Wonder Woman, we just couldn't save them. No matter how hard we tried, we just couldn't save them all. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Do you know what I mean? I'm getting chills now, just thinking about it. To have the Man of Steel, like broken down to that level. And of course, he has the lasso of truth around him, so his real emotions are coming up and everything. It was so fucking deep. And Wonder Woman, I'll read Wonder Woman's response, and then the comic book ends. She says, "I know it's going to be okay. We're going to get better. We're going to heal, and everything's going to be okay." And this struck me, and to this day, this panel still gets me, because there's times where, I'll play straight. There's times where I feel that. Like I've had moments, especially in the past few years, since I left the military, where I had to fucking deal with, what I project from myself that Superman's going through there. Not saying I'm Superman. Fuck no. Man, yeah, good shit. Great fucking comic book writing right there. Just phenomenal. Totally worth it. The whole thing's totally worth it. Yeah, I love it, and it goes to show. I mean, I had Wonder Woman was in my top 8 in the last. Superman was not, or at least not Superman as a whole in the abstract was not. But this was the thing. This is what I was saying about Wonder Woman in the last top 8, was that you don't understand when she got there. Like, she's the only person, not Lois Lane, not anybody. You take or Maxima, who always wanted to get with Superman because she thought he was the ultimate alpha male, blah, blah, blah. She's the only one that can hold Superman, bring Superman to tears, and actually reassure him. Powerful fucking moment. To see the real weakness and at the same time the real strength. That the real strength being in Wonder Woman and the weakness being in Superman. Phenomenal. Just one of the absolute best, little moments ever. And I'll put you can download the JPEG from the Patreon page for this episode. Just fantastic. So I don't want to spend much more time on that, but I loved it. I read that and I just felt like I felt it. God damn it, still do sometimes. It's yeah, comic books can do that. When they're done right, you can feel them. You can really, really feel what's going on. It's not just all, happy-go-lucky. Anyway, yeah, so that last panel from Wonder Woman during Joker Last Laugh, that's right up there. All right, so we're almost an hour in, so I got to speed this shit up. We got to get through this stuff. Okay, here's a fun one. In fact, since I mentioned military, why don't I break into it here? This is something that a lot of people maybe don't realize. I think when most people think G.I. Joe, they think, like the cartoon series, and they think of the 3.5 inch figures, right? Or 3 3/4 figures, which, I played with, 3 3/4 G.I. Joes. They were definitely my number one toy, next to maybe Lego. They were it. Like, those were the fucking toys, because they're practically indestructible. And I could talk about G.I. Joe forever. In fact, I'm making a G.I. Joe podcast right now. Totally separate podcast. I've talked about it before on Patreon episodes. And it has nothing, it's called Cobra Cast. It has nothing to do with G.I. Joe. I don't like G.I. Joe. I like Cobra. Okay? Which, the A in Cobra stands for anarchism, in case you didn't know that. And it's true. It's supposedly like that's kind of an urban legend, but it's a pretty good bet. Anyway, so it's been widely held for a while. We'll put it that way. So the history of G.I. Joe, I won't go into much depth with that here, but what people don't realize is that as popular as, like, say, the G.I. Joe cartoon was with kids in the 80s, actually, you know what? I need to take 1 second, because if you're a new listener to Sovereign Tech and you've never heard me talk about my military experience, when I was saying that I related to Superman, because of my military experience, it is not because I thought I was a hero when I was in the military. It's because I thought that I was a terrible villain in that. So don't think I'm not saying that what I did in the military is anything heroic whatsoever. I just want to make that super clear in case somebody completely misinterpreted what I said. It was not heroism. It was pure disgusting villainy. Anyway, switching up. Back to G.I. Joe. As much as in the 80s, that, you know, like kids knew the G.I. Joe toys and cartoons. The adults in the world far more were enjoying the comic books from Marvel that Larry Hama was writing. And these were, the cartoon and toys were concurrent with the Marvel comic book series, but they were also very different. You know, the toys and the cartoons matched up pretty closely. The comic book was really doing its own thing, kind of had its own continuity, a much better continuity. And in fact, most people today, when you talk to a lot of people that love G.I. Joe, they're usually talking about the comic book from Marvel, because it was so well done. It's an award-winning comic. It is a comic. Some of the issues of G.I. Joe, are, you know, and it was done. It definitely not as kitschy as say that, you know, the cartoon was from Deke. But like, it was serious, you know, and like, it was very, you know, there was a lot of realism. It wasn't blasting red and blue lasers all over the place or knowing's half the battle or anything like that. This was really serious. And there's specific issues, like, you know, issue numbers from Marvel's 80s G.I. Joe run that people still talk about today because they were so revolutionary and good. You know, as far as comic books go. In particular, there's one called Silent Interlude, and it's actually issue number 21 of G.I. Joe, of the Marvel run. And the entire thing has to do with Snake Eyes, of course, the ninja, you know, without a tongue, or that doesn't speak anyway, you know, that depending on what continuity you're looking at, where Snake Eyes is breaking into a Cobra base. And the interesting story around this particular issue is that, now it was kind of a rushed issue, like they were, you know, they had a deadline that they had to hit and all this, and back then deadlines used to matter in comic books. Today it doesn't seem they matter at all, but they mattered then. And it's called Silent Interlude. There is no speaking or really much in the way of word bubbles or anything. Like, there's no talking. You know, there's not even really like sound effects. Like, this is a silent comic. What a wild concept. And it worked. And people are still to this day. I mean, it became a silent. It's not like there was planned to be talking or anything, but definitely the absolute silence of the comic is due to it, you know, having, like, they really had to get it out there. They had a deadline they had to meet. But it's now seen as just pure genius. Like, wow, what a job. It's all art. It's all visual, the whole thing. There's no sound to be made. And it is, I mean, it's heralded as one of the greatest comics of all time. You know, just issue 21 of G.I. Joe. But G.I. Joe itself easily, you know, gains a lot of, has a lot of credibility in the comic book space because of just how great, you know, Larry Hama did. And now today, I mean, IDW is publishing, you know, they called up Larry Hama and they said, hey, we want you to, you know, pick up right with issue 155 and run. You know, and run with it. You keep your continuity, you do your thing. And IDW is doing their own G.I. Joe thing now as well, which is with the Revolution storyline, which is actually really good, where they're creating their entire Hasbro universe. But they're letting Larry Hama continue his legacy of just this tremendous comic book. And so again, it was very realistic, you know, with G.I. Joe, and, you know, in the 80s, and you know, the storylines were really interesting. I mean, there was a lot of political commentary in it, which was not unheard of for comic books, but this is really direct. And I mean, and the scale of it was really interesting. And what they did with Cobra, I mean, it's really, there's nothing else out there. Forget about the toys, forget about the cartoons, forget about the movies, forget about all of that. The G.I. Joe Marvel comic book of the 80s, like, there is nothing else like it out there, and people know it. And that's why 30 years later, they pick right up from issue 155. It's, you know, or at least IDW did. It's fantastic. I mean, and very serious. You know, the best correlation I could make to it would be like how the Fantastic Four, how there was nothing like the Fantastic Four, where you had the superhero family effectively that has problems, you know, and argues with each other, and they don't always have the same solutions, and there's issues, like there's really deep personal issues and all that. You get that in G.I. Joe in spades. And you wouldn't think it, but it's there. Very, very serious, you know, very deep, very, very adult comic book. So I'd be remiss. And honestly, like any, say, top 100 comic book series of all time, or even top 50, if the Marvel G.I. Joe run's not in there, they're full of shit. They don't know what the fuck they're talking about, because it is so well done. Larry Hama deserves all the adulation that he gets for doing that up. And again, they were concurrent. Understand that like Marvel and literally the Marvel comic book, that whole comic book came out of a meeting in the fucking bathroom. Dead serious. You had the guy from, Kenner, right? And the guy from, one of the guys at Marvel saying, oh yeah, I got to get this toy line launched off, blah, blah, blah. What are we going to do? And so they're there at the urinal and the guy from Marvel says, hey, let me give you a hand. Let's work this out. And that's pretty much how it happened. Not Kenner, sorry, Hasbro, duh. But that's how it happened. Is the CEO of Hasbro, Stephen Hassenfield, he's right there. He's talking with Jim Galton, of Marvel, and boom, there it is. Suddenly, you have one of the greatest comic books ever devised. So I'm glad that I'm doing the second top 8 where I can mention that. Okay, let's move on. Don't need to talk a whole. Everybody knows about G.I. Joe. You don't really need to. You don't need me telling you about that. I almost put Atari Force on here. This is the thing, is that Marvel was doing a hell of a job, like really interacting with toy lines and all this and making serious stuff out of it in the 80s. And in fact, they had what was called Atari Force, which was where they worked with Atari and their video games, like, Missile Command, a bunch of different other ones. And they would turn it into kind of this like, they turned it into comic book storylines. It was all interconnected, and you had like this, kind of super team called the Atari Force, or kind of this, not super team, but sort of a special ops team called the Atari Force that worked at Atari Labs, and it looked like the big Atari symbol and all that. That almost made my second top 8 here, but I enjoyed Atari Force. I thought it was funny, but anyway, there you have it. Okay, let's get back to, how about we get back to the sexy? Now, like I said, we talked about this a few times now in the 90s, that Marvel was really, really pushing sex. I mean, big fucking time. In fact, it's a miracle that they're not my favorite company, isn't it? But anyway, they were really, really pushing sex. And they had, what they did in the 90s, and I think it started in 92, and it ran 3 or 4 years. I know I had at least 3 of them. They may have done others that I wasn't aware of. But they had these totally erotic, they had what they called swimsuit specials once a year. And literally, they got their best artists, and they said, all right, draw our comic book characters. I mean, and they drew everybody. They even had the Wasp. And who knew, proportionally, the Wasp was smuggling hams, we'll put it that way, okay? They had all these characters, and they would draw them up, and they'd be like having a beach party or something, and everybody would be in swimsuits, blah, blah, blah. Men, I mean, and they sexualize the men just as much. I mean, there's one where like Namor's coming up out of the water, Namor the submariner, he's coming up out of the water, and his trunks are around his neck. So what's he wearing underneath, right? They went all the way. And I thought it was, as a teenager, I'm reading this, I'm like, holy shit. This is so good. And there's a classic shot with Colossus where he's just, he's in all of his, his steel, and just has like kind of these women pouring water over him and, giving him a scrub down, kind of a car wash almost. Captain America hanging out in his blue trunks and, reading a book, or like, the shot's great because I think he's like reading the Constitution and he's laying on the beach. It's so great. Oh man, it was sexy. Like, I mean, they fucking delivered. It was sexy. Or like, there's a great one of, Luke Cage is in it. There was a great one of Polaris, who also was from X-Force, that I thought she was great. She's kind of the daughter of Magneto, with the green hair, looked fantastic. That was really good. I mean, there's tons of them, and just some of the best artists, in the world. And I mean, they rocked it out, and they did it for like 3 or 4 years. I mean, damn, and the suggestive, or the suggestive nature of so many of the shots. Ooh. So the Marvel swimsuit issues easily make this list. They should have been on my first one. But I mean, hot damn, were they good. And you can find them. You can find the torrents of them. I'm sure maybe you can buy them on Comixology. I never bothered to look. But there's at least 3 or 4 of them that were really well done. Ironically, I talked earlier about Psylocke. they always seem to get the wrong artist to do Psylocke. Like, I never thought that the pictures they did of Psylocke really kind of did it justice compared to what's, usually in the comic book. So, speaking of Psylocke, quick, if you're going to ask me, I've talked about this on Sovereign Tech Prime, I'm pretty sure, or at least on other Patreon episodes. If you're going to ask me what did I think of Olivia Munn's performance of Psylocke in, what was that, Days of Future Past? X-Men Apocalypse, the most recent one. I thought she was terrible. Not necessarily in look, just like the entire treatment of Psylocke. I'm not even necessarily complaining about Olivia Munn, even though I don't think she did the best job. But the treatment of Psylocke in that movie sucked. Like, they did not take advantage of what that character can bring to the table, because it's a lot more than sex appeal. And that's a real pity, especially when you read Uncanny X-Force. You find out just how great a character she is. So that was a bit of a loss. So anyway, Marvel swimsuit issues, that comes in at number 6. Let's do a quick breakdown before we get to the last two. We have number 1, 2011 Uncanny X-Force. Number 2 is Priapus. Number 3 was the Hanna-Barbera DC kind of crossover, with Future Quest particularly. Number 4 was the segment from Wonder Woman during Last Laugh with Wonder Woman and Superman. Number 5 was G.I. Joe, the Marvel run. And number 6 was the Marvel swimsuits. Now, number 7... maybe a little bit of a cheat, but I don't think I talked about it enough, if I even mentioned it. I don't think I really talked about it during the previous top 8 where we talked about Batman, because this is one of the best things going in comic books right now. And in fact, it's one of the number 1 sellers going on for DC. And I think there's a reason for this, and I'll talk about it. Batman 66, okay? This is something that started a couple of years ago, and it started as a webcomic, but it was so fucking popular that they started doing print runs of it. And they still do. Batman 66 is literally a continuation of the Adam West, Burt Ward, Batman and Robin. And it is in that style. They do this kind of the more of the 60s style art at times. Other times they bring in a more modern style, depends on which creative team you have writing for it. But they keep within the tone, kind of the quasi-comedic, sexy tone, and this is not written for kids, make no mistake, of the Adam West Batman series. And it is dynamite. It is just pure gold, what they're doing there. I mean, it is so, so great. And I think the reason that this is so popular is because, to some degree, not that people are tired of the sex appeal, but they are tired of just like the overdroning darkness that seems to, or like, I don't want to say the seriousness, because I like the seriousness, but just like the, I don't know, almost the emo. That's kind of the problem, is that a lot of comic books have this real emo flavor to them, or, there's too much going on with the more interesting titles. And this is the antithesis of that. And that's why I think people go nuts for it, because they want kind of the thing that happens in the daylight. They want, the thing that's happening in the open and all this. And I appreciate that. And I love it. I mean, Batman 66, Adam West's Batman is my favorite Batman. That's nothing new. So to have that as a comic book, fucking great, and it's really good. And the crossovers they're doing now with Batman 66 are fantastic. Where they did Batman 66 meets The Man from U.N.C.L.E. They did where he meets the Avengers, and I mean, Stephen Peele, not like Captain America, the original Avengers from Britain. I think they're even, did they do a Bionic Woman? No. Okay, so then they're also doing Batman 66, and this has been the best crossover ever. Batman 66 and Wonder Woman 77, which they did a Wonder Woman 77 comic, which is also really good. And they did it because Batman 66 has been so popular. But where, pretty much Adam West and Linda Carter are getting together, baby. And it is just fantastic. Now, the reason I mentioned the Bionic Woman was because they have done a Bionic Woman, Wonder Woman 77 crossover, which is also really good. But Batman 66, lots of fun. Lots and lots of fun. And even if you're not, like, you kind of get the gist from, sort of the 66 Batman. I mean, I think everybody's at least seen one of those comics once, or, read, or not comics, TV shows once. And it does, I mean, it's so much fun. It's so great, and the comic book just takes it and runs with it. So that is number 7 on the list. Is Batman 66, just for, I mean, and they bring in all the characters, Catwoman, Batgirl, everybody's there, and they bring in the other cool thing too, is that they bring in Batman villains that Batman 66 never got to visit. never got to mess around with. So that's been really enjoyable as well. So you want to check out Batman 66 if you haven't yet. All right, let's move on to number 8, and then we'll wrap this up with a couple of quick questions. So this next one, this is really, this should have been on the first one, but again, that's why we're doing a second top 8. If you like only kind of know like sort of the origins or backstories of a lot of DC's characters, and you don't want to get like heavily invested in sort of the continuity, and don't bother getting invested in continuity because they keep fucking rebooting everything every year now. This is the comic for you. This is, for a lot of people, and I know I've mentioned it before, but this is, for a lot of people, this is what, like a lot of longtime DC fans, this is where they're putting all of their time. This is what they're reading. For me, this is like the last, I still keep track of some other DC titles, but this is kind of the big one where when this comes out, and actually it comes out on Tuesday because it's initially a web series. I am there, and I am on top of it because like I have to know. And the title is ironically, so I'll tell you the title. The title is Injustice: Gods Among Us. Okay, this was originally a video game that was released. This was like 2013, I think, that it came out. And the game it's effectively, it's like Mortal Kombat, literally, and it's actually made by NetherRealm Studios, the company that, that makes Mortal Kombat. It's Mortal Kombat with DC characters, but it's so much more. Like, there's a huge storyline here, and the game's great, by the way. And in fact, the second one's coming out this March, I think, 2017. The basic storyline is that, you have the Justice League, and the Joker at some point tricks Superman into killing Lois Lane and literally destroying Metropolis. And what happens is when that happens, Superman just like snaps, and he creates literally like a new world order under him. And so like the entire premise of the game is everybody trying to bring down Superman effectively. And the comic book exists within that world. And it is so good because they do not piss around. They do not mince words. They're like, okay, this is serious. The world is turned upside down and we are living in it, and we got to deal, we got to do something about this. It is so good. It's kind of post-apocalyptic DC porn in a way. I mean, it's just fantastic, and they're still running. Again, the second game's coming out, so they ended sort of I think it was like 5 volumes so far. They ended the last one, but now they're just picking up with another storyline. Again, all related. It's all still part of this, but I mean this is ridiculously popular, and for the reasons of, it's so well done. And the nice thing is that Injustice exists out, that comic series exists outside of all the other bullshit that's happening in DC, because, I'll be the first to tell you that I think DC Comics is really falling apart. I mean, what they're doing with Rebirth, some of the stories are pretty good. Now they're on their latest reboot now, but they've just kept rebooting, and it's like, fucking stop. And I talked all about this in the last top 8. But DC's in trouble. But comics like Injustice, like this is effectively their version of, remember when Marvel did their Ultimate series, where the Ultimate X-Men, Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimates, and all that. This is kind of their version of that, and it is top notch. Really, really good stuff that they're doing there. So Injustice is number 8. And you got to check it out. Just trust me on that. And the game's great too. I love the game. I mean, I love Mortal Kombat. And so, just to overlay DC characters on it, oh, please. I mean, and that was a long time coming. I mean, you had DC versus Mortal Kombat, right? You remember that game? That game wasn't necessarily the best, but Injustice is fantastic. And obviously this is a direct response to, like Marvel versus Capcom, which are equally great games. But more in a Street Fighter 2 style, as to where this is straight up Mortal Kombat. So it was a perfect fit. It's really worked out well, and the comic book series is eons better than even the game, and the game is actually great in my opinion. So check that out. If it might be the best place if you haven't read comics in a while. reading the Injustice series, and you can get great collected volumes of it, even though it's been out for a few years. It really wouldn't cost much to jump on top of it if you don't want to torrent it. This is a great place to start, in my opinion, with getting into the DC universe. Granted, it's a different DC universe, but it's still a lot of the same characters. Though you don't get into... The only problem with it is that, and this will actually bleed nicely into kind of the first question that I was asked. It doesn't let you take advantage of one of DC's greatest strengths, which is the gigantic intergalactic stories that DC can tell. Marvel can kind of do that, but DC really has science fiction sewn up. Like, DC just works great with science fiction. All of their characters do. It's all very believable, for comic books. As to where Marvel does it in this very abstract way, with Galactus and Thanos and Silver Surfer and all that. Even though, I love Silver Surfer. He was in my last top 8 there. But yeah, DC gets science fiction right, and Injustice really doesn't get to take advantage of that. Not at the grand scale that DC can do it. So now one of the questions I got, and I actually got it on Twitter, and I briefly touched on this in the last top 8, but I'll touch on it again. One of the questions is why do I like DC more than I like Marvel? Well, I mean, in that's kind of the first part of that answer is, and I touched on it in the last top 8, is that DC has that strong science fiction component. Like I said, Marvel can do things on a big universal intergalactic scale. You have the Celestials and all this, right? But it always comes off as like fantasy. It feels more like, and not that this is a bad thing, I'm just saying it's not, it doesn't appeal to me as much as the other. Marvel feels like Star Wars. Ironically, Star Wars is owned by the same company that owns Marvel. But now anyway. But yeah, so Marvel feels more like Star Wars, as to where DC feels like Star Trek, where everything is really well thought out, very believable. You're not fucking around, and like there's life in this universe. There's characters in this universe. Star Wars has tons of life in it, but like DC has lots of life and lots of characters, within it as well. I mean, like really fleshed out, it's really out there. How they've done that, with Dark Stars, Legion, Legionnaires, Green Lantern Corps, and even more than that. That's, for me, that's kind of the big deal. The other thing is that with DC, you feel like the comic book characters are significantly larger than life. And I mean, like these are, I mentioned this in the last top 8. There's the book called Our Gods Wear Spandex, and it's about the history of comic books, but it's talking about how comic book characters are really just retellings of like the stories of the Greek gods or of other, pantheons of gods throughout human history. And you really feel like like Injustice, Gods Among Us, you feel like in DC that these characters are effectively gods. And I'm not talking about like with, Jack Kirby's, Fourth World or something, like on New Genesis or on, Apocalypse, right? Not like Apocalypse from, Marvel, but like, Darkseid, right? That character and all that. Everything just seems so much bigger and so much grander. Like Marvel, I don't think Marvel could pull off a Kingdom Come. Kingdom Come could have made these lists as well. Kingdom Come was this big, to do in the 90s, where I think it was Alex Ross and whoever else, they were writing like, okay, this is the DC universe 100 years later. And they've gone back to Kingdom Come a few times, but I mean, the artistry is just beautiful. It's a tremendous story of what happens. It's really something. And of course, it all culminates with a child, which, spoiler alert, the child is kind of the stranger, which has to do with the Phantom Stranger. Another character that could have been in my top 8 is the Phantom Stranger. I love that character. But like that, yeah, see, Phantom Stranger is another one too. Like with DC, like Phantom Stranger is this character that has like this amazing history and has been there for all these different parts of history that we know as humans, like with the pyramids or something in Egypt, and all this wild shit. And then you have the Phantom Stranger who kind of comes out. It's like, oh yeah, I know all about that. And Yeah, I just feel like DC plays on such a grander scale and really like just goes with that epicness. And then they have the science fiction component that like everything's so well thought out. There's a lot of science behind what they do, or well, at least attempts at kind of pseudoscience, I guess. But at least they're trying, which great science fiction usually tries to make it very believable, right? And they do that. So that for me, that's what makes DC so much better. Is everything just seems, everything just seems more, I don't know, just bigger, a lot more serious. Which nothing to take away. I mean, maybe if in the aughts, if Marvel didn't back down on, particularly in the aughts, before Uncanny X-Force, if they didn't back down on the sexiness, maybe they'd be at the top of my list. But they did. They backed off. And it sucks, it pisses me off. And not that DC ever like overtly did anything sexy, kind of like Marvel did in the 90s, but it's still kind of it really is still kind of there. Like you sort of get it. I mean, actually with New 52, they definitely turned up the sexiness, like between Batman and Catwoman. Also DC, very well known for kind of the first comic book company to have homosexual characters. Be it the lover of Kyle Rayner or the crush of Kyle Rayner, or person that had a crush on Kyle Rayner, or Batwoman being a lesbian, and I didn't mean Batgirl, I said Batwoman. Cassandra Cain, and all of this different stuff. I mean, yeah, they just have so much more going for them. It's so much bigger. And I know people want to say, yeah, but the Marvel movies are so good. Isn't that just like proof of just how well Marvel can scale and all this? Yeah, and I've said this before too. I know I've talked about it on Patreon. DC Comics, DC's animated universe smokes everything Marvel does. Like the animated movies from DC, like when they do DC Presents with Bruce Timm and all that, just blows away, other than maybe the 92 X-Men, just blows away every Marvel movie. Like they don't even come close. They're not even comparable compared to what DC does with DC Presents. Any of what DC does with DC Presents. Any of the Batman Superman movies that they did with that. I mean, it's a shame that DC hasn't necessarily hit its stride as far as cinematic films go, or at least as far as the cinematic universe goes. They've obviously had some of the best movies ever made. I mean, Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy is phenomenal. Superman 1, the Richard Donner, 1979, Christopher Reeves. I mean, that's one of the greatest movies of all time. Arguably the last American classic. Or even I thought Man of Steel, Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, I thought that was incredible. I mean, just an incredible film. So, Marvel's got some kind of like wild success going for them right now, but I don't think that's indicative at all over who has the better franchise, the better properties, the better characters, etc. But I mean, a lot of that comes down to taste. It really does. And I'd probably, like I said, if Marvel was sticking with how they were in the 90s, I probably would I'd feel the opposite, but that's just me. So anyway, that's why I think, I hope that explains it. That's why I think Marvel is better than, or why DC is better than Marvel. Just because, everything just feels more legit, feels bigger, feels like there's more things, the stakes are higher. And I think there's a lot more experimentation really that gets done at DC, believe it or not. Outside of the 90s Marvel, well, I mean, here's the thing, like really, in my opinion, except for maybe Fantastic Four previous, outside of like 80s, kind of late 80s, 90s Marvel, like I really don't think Marvel had that much going for it. Uncanny X-Force is great, but that was like a 90s title. That's why. And I dig what's going on with Doctor Doom. I like that he's taken over for Iron Man and all this. And Iron Man has had some interesting storylines in the past few years, sure. But like that just doesn't compare to the fact that you can pick up almost any DC title and you're getting some kind of great epic fucking story. Not that everything has to be epic either. It doesn't. DC can do that too, where it's not epic. But man, yeah. Just my feelings on it. The only thing Marvel has going for it are its movies. And even those, I think people are sick of. And rightfully so, because there's no risk. Nobody's going to die. This is the other thing. I mean, like DC they could do a death. I mean, they could do a death like nobody's business. Superman, Hal Jordan. I'm not saying they didn't end up to be bullshit later down the line, but when they were pushing it it was the biggest thing happening on the planet. And I don't mean in universe. I mean in our universe. It was the biggest fucking thing happening on the planet. Happening on the planet. I mean, when Batman supposedly died, people were talking about that. So, anyway, okay. Now let's. How about a Marvel question? All right. So the question is, what are my thoughts on Lady Thor? So Lady Thor is this idea that's been around. It's actually kind of come and gone a few times. I mean, as far back, frankly. Kind of the concept. Well, the main character that would end up becoming Lady Thor has been around since the 60s, since Thor really kind of started. And the character is Jane Foster, who usually, is the mantle of Lady Thor. Jane Foster was played by Natalie Portman in the recent Marvel movies, if you recall. And I know you cannot imagine her as being any kind of Thor. Well, you're right. I like Natalie Portman quite a bit, but yes, I agree. She didn't necessarily fit the bill for the potentials of that. But in the comic books, it's been revisited a few times to where she kind of takes Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, says that, or effectively says that Jane Foster is worthy of carrying the hammer, and so she does. And it's pretty cool when it happens. I think a lot of people kind of freak out and they're like, oh, they're supposedly a lot of people, maybe people that would identify as alt-right or something, they like to find something that they can complain about. And so they're like, oh, Marvel's having a Lady Thor there, watering down our great, Viking heritage or our great Nordic heritage or some kind of bullshit like that, right? Which is just total nonsense. But anyway, so the character itself, I mean, I think it's fine. It doesn't, you have other characters within kind of the Asgard hierarchy in the Marvel continuity, that are female, that nobody has any issue with them. They're totally legit. Lady Thor works. I mean, the character of Jane Foster is interesting because she's a character that is, depending on which rebooted continuity we're dealing with, usually has some form of breast cancer or something. So in some ways, her becoming Lady Thor is, life and death. And it works. Like having a female Thor actually, it's not as funny as Thor can be. Like he definitely has sort of a shtick that he's been delivering for a few decades now, where he's kind of over the top, but she's a lot more serious, and I don't know if you want to say more powerful, but it really does work. I don't have any problem with Lady Thor at all. And it's an old idea. It's not something new that's part of the Clinton campaign or something. That's nonsense. So, I mean, because Jane Foster, the character, has, been around forever, too. And, I mean, I'm not always on board with this. Sometimes, okay, so in cosplay, I'm not going to spend much longer here. In cosplay, there is this somewhat common idea of where you take a character and you switch their genders and then you go and do a cosplay with it. I don't want to get into a huge topic about cosplay because I have a lot of issues with it, okay? I don't mind that people do it. I'm not telling you don't do it. I'd never say anything of the sort. I'm just saying I have issues with it to where it's become like there's cosplay has gotten to the point to where, and cosplay is just where you dress up like a hero, say at a convention or something, right? You dress up as a character from your favorite franchise. There is an issue where, in my opinion, where people are to keep from having to go to the heights of realism, how you can win awards and everything, because it's become a competition now. Now, for lack of a better phrase, cosplay has turned into a dick measuring contest in a million ways. To keep from having to worry about getting to these higher levels of realism, what cosplayers seem to have done in the past, 5-6 years maybe, is now they are just flipping genders. That way they don't have to be perfect like it is on the comic book page or on the screen. Or they do like a mashup where it's a comedic, mix between two. And both of those kind of annoy me because it's fine. You can do it. I'm not going to knock you for doing it. I'm just saying that, I appreciate looking at cosplayers for how close they are to the creator's vision. And the creator is not the cosplayer. Okay? The creator is the person that fucking made the character. Or, or like the writers that have been charged to carry on the character. So I'm big on. I don't give a shit about intellectual property. IP is crazy. It is just absolutely ridiculous. But I mean, I do just have human respect for creative efforts. That's all. Not to say that that keeps me from infringing upon IP. I do it all the time. I'm just saying that I like things to look pretty legit if they can. So. Like, there's been some people that have cosplayed with Lady Thor, in particular Abby Darkstar, and she looks fantastic. I won't deny that. But yeah, this whole kind of like flipping genders things, I don't have any problem with it. Go ahead and do it. I really don't care. A lot of people do seem to have a problem with it. I'm trying to differentiate where my problem lies, and otherwise, like if you want to make a Lady Thor in the comic books. I'm saying outside of it, it doesn't intrigue me as much. And I think it's kind of bullshit. But within the comic books, if they want to do it, well, then that's up to them. That's up to Marvel. Go ahead. Have a good time with it. I don't care. And it works. Jane Foster does a great job. And there's been some really, even in some of the rebooted continuities, like the all new Marvel, there's been some really great storylines where, Jane Foster goes out as Lady Thor, saves the fucking day, but then when she's not Thor, she has to deal with having breast cancer and she's in a hospital. And, say a certain hero will go and sit with her, and it's really cool. It makes for a very interesting dynamic. So, yeah, I don't mind the idea of Lady Thor at all. I think it can actually, when it's done right, when anything's done right, it can work. There's times where that it's kind of a cash-in and it's bullshit, but Lady Thor, I think, actually... I think it delivers. And because we've dealt with a million times where Thor is either not there for some reason or something's, finding Thor or something's wrong with Thor, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's just been the history of the character. So having a Lady Thor, nothing new. It fits right in with what we've known for decades as far as Thor goes. So there you go. Anyway, that's enough of that. I think this ran a lot longer than I planned. I'm not, I will say overall, that I'm not the biggest fan of the Thor comics whatsoever. I liked J. Michael Straczynski's run. Of course, I like his run on anything, but I liked his run on Thor. That was really cool. But Thor just doesn't really, do anything for me. And I'm not even a big fan of the movies either. I might see Thor Ragnarok or whatever the new one is, but nah. It always seems so stupid. Like, in fact, I think I talked about this when I was reviewing the second Thor movie. Was that The Dark World or something? It's so crazy. They have all this incredible medical technology in Asgard. They have, in Asgardia, whatever. They have all these, just incredible advancements, and yet they still go to war. Like, it's just, it's kind of a dumb, like, the whole Asgard thing is kind of a dumb concept. I mean, like, really dumb. Like, it doesn't even make sense. And that kind of speaks back to, why is Marvel better than DC? Because in some ways, I mean, I'm sure there's an example out there where DC did, but they wouldn't have stuck with it. When DC gets into kind of these other realms and into more of a science fiction, more of a galactic scale, which kind of Thor is, when you get to Asgard and all that, or Midgard, whatever, like, DC doesn't let that kind of stupidity pass. I mean, they really don't. Because, like, when a species gets to that level, like, say, like in DC, you have the Guardians, right, on Oa, who they created the Green Lantern Corps. What do? They create the Green Lantern Corps to protect all the other living, sapient species that can't protect themselves, and to protect them from, like, these really crazy threats out there. And so they're not going to war with anybody. They're just like, okay, well, we've got to, there's certain elements in this universe that effectively could wipe shit out. We just need to send out protectors. They're totally defensive, and that makes tons of sense, right? I mean, just logically. I mean, none of the shit's anarchist. It doesn't, reach the heights of logic in any way. It's just, they do a better job of being a little more believable. It's such nonsense that, in Thor's world, they can do all this incredible stuff, and yet they declare war right and left. It's bullshit. So anyway, I mean, and yeah, you could talk about, New Gods and all that in DC. I mean, and that's a whole other story. So, but I just always thought that was dumb with the Asgardians. All right, that really is it. Enough. I'm not sure when the next entry in this will be, but I guarantee you will not be Marvel or DC. We'll probably get into either Valiant or Dark Horse, or maybe we'll do both for the next comic book top 8. Again, I'm not sure when I'm going to be able to release that, but next week you're going to be getting a ton of content. Just a ton of fucking content, and I hope you'll enjoy it. So I'll see you on the other side, everybody. New Sex and Science Hour will be out this week, of course, and a dynamite Sovryn Tech episode 208 will be out this week as well. So again, I'll see you on the other side.
You just experienced Sovryn Tech. Go to sovryntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.